We seek to restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act.
What we're seeing right now in this mid-cycle redistricting process is just pure manipulation of the political process. There's no other way to look at it.
The Voting Rights Act was really gutted in 2013 to make it more difficult, to make it harder for folks to vote. They really unleashed voter suppression.
We will never abandon the fight for the right to vote. Hi, I'm Janai Nelson, President and Director Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund, LDF. I am thrilled to be in conversation today with Congresswoman Terri Sewell. We are going to talk about how we can protect the voting rights of Black people and everyone in our democracy, as we are now witnessing some of the most vicious assaults on civil rights in more than half a century. Congresswoman Terri Sewell represents Alabama's 7th Congressional District, which includes the historic city of Selma, where John Lewis and other voting rights foot soldiers were beaten by state troopers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965, just 60 years ago, to help us all secure the right to vote. And Representative Sewell is also the lead House sponsor of the aptly named John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The VRAA, as we call it, would restore and strengthen the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act this year, along with the heroic work of everyone who participated in Bloody Sunday, so that we could all have a democracy, the democracy that we're fighting so hard to keep today. So Congresswoman Sewell, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm just truly honored and excited to be talking with you.
Well, Janai, thank you so much, and thank the amazing team of lawyers and all your staff that make up LDF for all that you have done, not just in the realm of voting rights, but that you do continuously and have done. I mean, the reputation of LDF is second to none, and with you at the helm, you're just taking control of an organization that has a long, great history of amazing directors, and you're following in their footsteps and doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I agree. I'm fortunate to have amazing predecessors who have helped carry the torch for over 80 years. And, at LDF, when we talk about the Voting Rights Act, which we've been involved in enforcing and defending for as long as it's been around, we like to say that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is the birth certificate of our multiracial democracy. Because before its passage, America really was not a true democracy. There were broad swaths of people who had a right to vote in theory, but not in practice. Millions of Black people, especially in the South where you're from, were denied the right to vote by force, by terror, by trickery. And sadly, in its 60th anniversary year, the Voting Rights Act is now a shredded shield. It's still a critical tool, but it no longer provides the same robust protections that it originally did and that it is supposed to. And the fight against voting discrimination that helps Black voters participate in the electoral process on equal footing could not be more important. So, Representative Sewell, you're the lead sponsor of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. How would that legislation strengthen and better protect voting rights?
I couldn't have crafted the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act without amazing stakeholders like LDF. I think all of us know that the Voting Rights Act was really gutted in 2013 by the Shelby County versus Holder decision, which really gutted a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, the provision that said which jurisdictions should be covered and therefore have to pre-clear all of their voting laws before those laws come into effect. That provision was found to be unconstitutional, but in doing so, what they did is they really let off the hook states like Alabama, Mississippi, but we also know that parts of New York were covered jurisdictions. I mean, they really let those states off the hook, but they also ignited a flurry of voting right laws implemented all across this nation to make it more difficult, to make it harder for folks to vote. So they really unleashed voter suppression. And so what this act does, this bill does, we seek to restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act, and therefore we've come up with a modern day formula to determine which jurisdictions should be required to pre-clear their laws based on their history of voter discrimination. And so, this is truly an effort to restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. As you know, what we're left with without Section 4 and 5, what we're left with is Section 2, the voter dilution. Now we can sue after the fact, that these laws or these maps become effective. We can sue for voter discrimination then.
I want to spend a little bit more time on the inspiration for the Voting Rights Advancement Act, John R. Lewis. Before he was a member of Congress, he was a young foot soldier, as we mentioned, who put his body on the line in Selma and marched to Montgomery ultimately after being beaten and harmed by state troopers on the bridge. And that sacrifice ultimately led to the signing of the Voting Rights Act. What advice do you think John Lewis would have in this moment for activists and everyday people who are very concerned about where this country is headed and want to use their individual agency to protect the right to vote and use it for transformative change?
You can't grow up in Selma without a healthy understanding of its place in history and the importance of that march and the importance of what happened on that bridge. I grew up in a church where John Lewis and those foot soldiers would come back year after year after year. They wanted to make sure that we never forget what happened on that bridge. And so as a little girl, I was in the children's choir. As a young adult, I was an usher, and as an adult, a parishioner. And so I grew up watching this year after year. I never thought that 60 years after that march, that first I'd be a member of Congress, let alone have an opportunity to call John Lewis colleague and to work closely with him and to take that pilgrimage. Every year he would invite a bipartisan group from Congress to walk across the bridge, to retrace his footsteps. And we're keeping that alive even though John is gone. We're living in a time when efforts are afoot to erase our history, where seminal pieces of legislation are and executive orders are doing away and cutting important funding, leaving millions of Americans without health care. You know what I think John would say in this moment? I'm reminded of what John said on that Edmund Pettus Bridge on his very last time that he was able to attend before his death. He was riddled with cancer, but they drove him to the apex of that bridge. He stood up strong. His voice was very strong. And John told us, never give up, never give in, keep the faith, and keep our eyes on the prize. So I know that John is looking down at the times that we're living in, and he is counting on us to not give up, to stay engaged, to mobilize and organize, to push back, to litigate, to legislate, to do whatever we have to do to make sure that we keep the Voting Rights Act and that we restore it to its full protections. So I think that John and those foot soldiers, they just didn't happen upon Selma. I believe that they were strategists and tacticians, and we could take a page from their playbook. They didn't give up. Can you imagine if John and those foot soldiers, after they were bludgeoned on that bridge, if they had just given up and didn't come back for Turnaround Tuesday, didn't come back for the ultimate march? So we can't give up on this. I know that we are tired and weary. We are even downright mad, angry, but we must not give up.
Oh, I could not think of any truer words. I love that quote from John R. Lewis. So I'm interested in knowing what you see as the most urgent threat to voting rights and democracy right now, and what are some of the priority efforts to push back?
The biggest threat to voting rights right now, I think, is redistricting. I think all of us know that Trump has sent out a message that he wanted Texas to find 5 seats. He is openly and publicly trying to steal the next election. And he's using as his weapon redistricting.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is just a blatant weaponization of the redistricting process. We know that in an ideal world, redistricting happens every 10 years. Every 10 years we have a census. Right after that, the new lines get drawn based on the new data that we have about population shifts, population growth, and it makes sense to ensure that everything is fair based on the new information we have. What we're seeing right now in this mid-cycle redistricting process is just pure manipulation of the political process. There's no other way to look at it. And not only is this an aggressive effort to undermine the will of the majority from the administration and their political backers, but also, this was enabled by the Supreme Court. There was a case, Rucho versus Common Cause, which, many may remember, is the case that said partisan gerrymandering is something that the Supreme Court and no federal court can rein in, that it is considered an issue that is non-justiciable, meaning that it's something that our federal courts cannot actually rule on. I find that very, very difficult to stomach. It's the world that we're in. But what that has done is it's opened a Pandora's box, a flurry of voter suppression and manipulation through unfair redistricting processes. And what I think we need to be doing is, in addition to passing these voting rights acts, is expanding the demand for independent redistricting commissions that make this redistricting process nonpartisan, not even just bipartisan, but nonpartisan, and that really ensure that maps that are drawn are fair, that they reflect the composition and demographics of any given state, that they empower historically marginalized communities, and that they make sense. We should also be thinking about other forms of voting beyond districting as well.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that when I think about the protector of voting rights, it is the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that has been the true guardian of the Voting Rights Act. And I can tell you that because of my foremothers, our foremothers and forefathers, those amazing foot soldiers like John Lewis, we owe it to them. Those of us who've been beneficiaries of their sacrifice, we owe it to them and to the next generation to do our part, to do our part. And history tells us that what goes around comes around, and that we are a resilient people. We are a resilient people. And while things are tough and they may get tougher, we have to make sure that we double down on our commitment to fight back, to do all that we can to help each other, to actually try to move the needle forward whenever we can, and use whatever resources and that we have. And I'm just grateful that we have LDF as an amazing resource when it comes to litigation.
Well, Congresswoman Sewell, I can tell you that LDF is equally honored to have you as a partner. You've been a stalwart in the fight for voting rights and for racial justice and for our democracy as a whole. Voting is how we express our power in our democracy, so there could not be a more important fight for us to be united on. And this is a moment of severe and significant threat. But as you said, we are a resilient people. We are a resilient country. We've been through worse, and we will certainly come out on the right side of history if we all commit to honoring it and to paying it forward to future generations. We will never abandon the fight for the right to vote. We will never abandon the cause of justice and the ideals in our Constitution, no matter how dire the circumstances appear to be, because we know that when we fight, we win, and that we would not be here at LDF for 85 years and counting if we were deterred by obstacles, if we were deterred by racism and some of the worst possibilities from politicians and others and threats that we have faced over the years, if we didn't have that same will that Representative Sewell talked about and that John Lewis taught us to get in good trouble, to never give up and never give in. I'm so grateful for this inspiring conversation, and I want to thank you for your time, Congresswoman, for everything that you do to help the cause of justice.
Amen is all I say to that.